Welcome. This is our third, I think, show on basic setup. So we've covered camber, caster, toe, and tire pressure. And due to popular demand, we're going to talk about tires tonight. We're going to cover street tires and cover things like the Hoosiers, 790s, 795s, things like that. So we will cover both racing tires and street tires. Sorry, it's a long day of work. The street tires will be covering things like treadwear, traction, temperature, size, compound, tread pattern, all those sorts of things. So we've got quite a bit to cover. Yeah. So hello, everyone. If you're watching this in the future, especially over there on YouTube, we're going to take a minute or two here to talk about a couple things before we jump right into the tech. So, yeah. So I want to address something. I wasn't sure if I was going to do this tonight, but I figured I might as well. I posted a picture a day or two ago of an enduro car that had been wrecked. Hard. Some of you have probably seen it. A Cavalier got confused for a CRX. It was smashed that badly. Now, the car got smashed because it died on the track for whatever reason. It happens in enduro. And apparently the push car, I have not seen the video of this part just because the video I've seen didn't have this part in it. But the push car apparently came out and took a different direction than it was supposed to and clipped a racer, which sent him into the parked car. So nobody's fault. Nothing big. Red Angel Forever. Hello on YouTube. Welcome, YouTubers. But it was no ill intent, no maliciousness. Car died, stayed on the track. It's an enduro, stayed green. And it was a vicious looking hit in the video. And the picture of the car, it's pretty messed up. And in that post, I flat out, I start out by saying, imagine if this was just a spreader bar with a stock seat, which is more than I've seen some people do in an enduro. Okay. I then at the end have a whole paragraph where I say, the cage and the seat, let the driver walk away unharmed. The cage, while simple, did its intended job. Straight up said it was not to bash anybody about it. That kind of picture, that kind of wreck is going to be shown on this page. It's going to be talked about, and it's going to be used for safety purposes. It might be to praise somebody for their high level of safety. It might be to bring attention to the what ifs and show these are the reasons why you want these safety items. In this instance, the car had a cage. It had down bars, which probably saved it because the main issue, what caused the car to fold so badly, it's evident from the picture. It was very rusty underneath. It was a Cavalier. If you have a Cavalier, there's a good chance that section's rusty, right? I don't know how the cage was constructed. I don't know how it was put on or anything like that. And we didn't comment on that. It wasn't about the cage in the car. It was about the guys who think that's too extreme. That's just an enduro. You're not really going that fast. I've been saying the same thing for years. Years. The enduros are a stock Hornet class with no safety regulations at all. One track kind of local to me, it's not that far a drive, literally had the flyer for their picture showed a driver wearing a cutoff t-shirt, and I mean cutoff t-shirt with a motocross helmet, wearing a pair of mechanics gloves. That was on their flyer. That was their advertisement for the Enduro. Can Enduro cars not catch on fire? Is that not a real concern? Like, I'm just asking, right? I'm going to continue posting about this stuff. If it upsets you, if it's not the right time to talk about it, it's because it inconveniences you. You don't want to see the negative part of things. It happens all the time. We were in a little hot water for posting a picture from the Chili Bowl. Some of you might remember that. I received death threats from that because it's not the time. Nobody cares later. So if you are involved in a wreck and you don't pass away and there are pictures or videos, there's a significant chance it's going to get shown here on the channel. And we're going to talk about it. And it is to bring awareness so other people can either have the same positive result you have, which is what happened in this instance. He walked away. That's a positive. That's as positive as outcome as you could have. Or we're going to talk about the negative outcome so that hopefully other people don't suffer that same negative outcome. I've posted my failures on this page. I don't name names when possible. I don't try to single anyone out when possible. It is about the message, not the person, not the car. So that is going to continue to happen. I'm not sorry about it. I'm not going to be sorry about it. If you take up that big of an issue with it, message me. Because the people who have a problem with it usually don't message me. They just post something. But a significant portion of people do message me how they learned something. That Chili Bowl picture got a lot of race cars looked at. A lot of race cars. I got dozens of messages from people who found something. The one thing I forgot to do. I got dozens of messages from people who found problems with their race car that fixed them because of that picture and the awareness that it brought. So we're going to continue to do that. I'm sorry if it upsets you. If it leads to an unfollow or you know, making the page never be seen again, okay. If you just don't like it because it's inconvenient, you don't want to think about the negative, hopefully I won't have to talk about you. So I've said it for years. If something negative happens, I'm going to talk about it. So, oh, don't worry. Don't worry, Lewis. I was going to message you about it. Yeah, keep your video up. Keep it up. Because somebody might see that video of that wreck and see how bad it was. Kind of like when Gary got absolutely destroyed in an enduro. I hope it doesn't come to the point where somebody has to die for enduros to be seen for how fast these cars are and how much of a risk it is. So, especially on dirt, because those cars have just an equal chance of rolling over on dirt as they do in a race car. So, yeah. We are, Kevin, but we had to get that out of the way first because it was important. So, all right, let me make sure we haven't missed anything. Oh, what's up, Amanda? Amanda and Matthew Bursley watching on YouTube, and Travis Black. Travis asked, when you say cage, how many points are you talking? It all depends on how they're designing it. Most rules are just a minimum 4-point cage. My race car sitting right here right now is a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I have 12 points and I'm not done yet. So, tires. Let's get into it. This is what you all came for, okay? Tires, we're going to start out with the simple stuff. They're round, they're black, okay? What's up, Sam? They're round, they're black, should be black, and they're either going to have tread or they're not. Those are the simple things, okay? We're going to start out with the simplest of things. Had to remember this. It's been a minute since I've had to mess with street tires. A 205/70 R14. That is the size of a tire. And I've just randomly picked this. Okay. The P stands for passenger car. Pretty simple. You might see a LT. Those are kind of the two most common ones. But that designates what the usage of the tire is, the tire class. Okay. The next one, what's up, Red Angle? Man, we are picking up on the YouTubes. That's okay. You can do both of them. The next number is your size in width. Okay. So I do want to remind the audience that I cannot draw very well at all. So, okay, how wide your tire is, and it is measured in millimeters. So this one is 205 millimeters. And we will talk a little bit more about why sometimes that's not actually 205, but we'll talk about that in a minute. 70 is the aspect ratio. That is the sidewall height. Okay. So you have your rim, you have your tire. This right here is your sidewall. Okay. This number correlates to how tall your tire is, but it is a ratio of the first number. So this is 70% of 205 millimeters. That's how tall your sidewall is. That one, some of the old school guys, I don't know if anybody of them are in here. But yeah, I've had this argument with a bunch of old timers. This is the aspect ratio. This is not the width, okay? R, radial, means steel belted radial. Means that there's steel belts inside the tire. The last number is the diameter of your rim. Pretty simple. If you have a 14-inch rim, you have a 14-inch tire. Pretty simple, okay? This number is going to be on pretty much every street tire. Oh, I left them over there. Hopefully this one will work. On pretty much every street tire that you are going to buy, okay? Now, if you want to run a taller tire, you can do one of two things to make a taller tire. You can change the first number. Technically, you can do three. You can change the first number, you can change the second number, or you can change them both. Because if I have 70% of 205, or I have 70% of 225, that is a bigger number. And you guys could do the math if you'd like to fact check me, but it is, okay? So if I have a wider tire, it's going to be taller if everything else stays the same. But at the same token, if I have a 75, so now it's 75% of 205, it's taller. But if I go to a bigger and bigger, then it's even taller yet, right? The exact same but opposite applies for a shorter tire. So you could go to a 185, or you could go to a 60 series, okay? Now, one thing to keep in mind too is that because this is an aspect ratio and that is the width, if you do change the last number, change the diameter of your rim, the tire will also get bigger or smaller. So if you run 13s with a 205/70, so I guess there's four things you can do. If you run a 205/70 13, you're gonna have a shorter tire. If you run a 205/70 16, you're gonna have a taller tire. So you can run the same width, the same aspect ratio with a different rim size and have a taller, shorter tire. Okay. Now, why is 205 not always 205? Well, one thing to keep in mind, there is nobody checking tires. So what I mean by that is if a factory was to make a tire and they say it's 205 millimeters wide, okay, you have the top of your tire, you have your sidewall, and then you have a shoulder. Okay. Some tires might have a gradual sidewall. Some tires might have the smallest of radios. Okay. Some tire companies might measure from the sidewall to the sidewall. Some might measure from the outside of a tread block to the outside of a tread block. Some of them might measure from the flat spot to the flat spot. There is no hard and fast rule as to what the manufacturer has to measure to as far as that goes, as far as width goes. Okay. Now, why this matters is that if you have brand A and it's a 205/70/15, and you have brand B and it's a 205/70/15, they can be both wider or narrower, and they can be taller or shorter, even though they are the same size. Okay. So while that size does matter, and typically across the same brands, the same size is going to, if you have a 225 and then you switch to a 205, it's going to be narrower, it's going to be shorter. Okay. So across the same brand should match. But if you switch brands, you could have wider, taller, shorter, just because you are, they're not being measured the same, right? The best way to actually figure out how tall your tire is for your gearing is to measure their circumference. Okay. You have your rim, you have your tire, your circumference. For those of you that said you would never use algebra ever again in your life, teacher lady, why do I have to learn this? It is simply how far around it or how big it is around. Okay. That measurement is going to tell you how many times that tire has to roll to travel like a mile. Then you can do all the math, all the calculations, and you can figure out your mile per hour based on your gear ratio, your RPM, and the tire size. And you can get kind of close with diameter, which is diameter. Again, it's that algebra, is the distance from there to there in a straight line. Radius is, half of that, right? Diameter can get you really close. But unless you have, like, say, a stagger stick, which actually measures the diameter but translates it to circumference, if you are measuring diameter simply based off from the manufacturer's size, what they say it should be, you might not actually have the proper circumference. So if you're one of those guys that are trying to get like 50 more RPMs because you want a tire that's like 3/4 of an inch bigger, well, you got to measure it. Okay. And circumference is the easiest way to do it. You can get a fancy tire stagger tape. You can get a regular tape measure. Sewing tape measures work really good because they're flexible and they go around. Okay. Any number of ways you can do it, but that is the easiest way to actually figure out how big your tire is. And the difference between one tire height and the other tire height will be the best accurate way to determine your speed change or your RPM change based on, the track you're running. Okay. Does that all make sense? And yes, Michael, I apologize for calling you old. And yeah, tire size used to be by letters. Okay. That's why I said the old school guys. Tire size used to be by letters. You used to have a F50 or a D90 or whatever the heck. Okay. The reason that these are now like a 205 in that is actually something called the UTQG. And this is what all of the numbers and letters are based off from. It is the Uniform Tire Quality Grading. Okay. This was put in place to make it easier because Firestone might have an F60, but it's a certain size, and Bridgestone might have a different F60 and all of that, right? So, yeah. What is the ideal Air pressure to measure the tire circumference. Whatever you're going to run, that's what I would measure. If you are only going to run 10 psi in a tire, there's no sense in pumping it up to 50 to measure it. If you're going to run it at 50, there's no sense in measuring it at 10. Now, steel belted radials don't vary a lot, but like a Hoosier tire can vary a lot because they're a bias ply and not a steel belted radial. Those steel belts really do a good job at holding things together. But whatever tire pressure you're going to run, measure them at that. Now, if you want to measure to compare all of your tires, just pick an air pressure and always measure your tires at that. That way, you know, if you take air out, it's going to get a little smaller. If you put air in, it should get a little bit bigger. You're not going to change a lot. And you can test that out too. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, whatever your pressures are going to be, measure it at each one so you can see the growth. But if you measure all your tires at, say, 25 PSI, then that will give you a baseline for every tire to know at 25, they're this size. And that's a good side-by-side comparison. So no perfect air pressure, just kind of pick one. So yeah. Sewing tape measures for the win. I've never had to use one, but I have a few. So uniform tire quality grading system, okay? Put in place by the government. It actually is kind of nice because it's easier to understand across all the tires, right? So now let's get into a little bit of all the rest of the numbers because there's a few other numbers and letters that are on your tires that are going to make a difference, okay? One thing that I want to tell you guys about is the date code, okay? Date code is really easy to figure out, and it's something you should pay attention to if you have, like, if you're using street tires. The rubber in the tires, the longer that it sits out, the longer that it's exposed to ultraviolet light and air, they're going to get harder. It just happens. It's the rubber curing, okay? So the freshest tire you can get is usually the best tire. Now, tires do need a minimum cure time, okay? But most passenger car tires are going to have that time on them when you get them, okay? So the date code, there should be a block somewhere on the tire. It's going to be kind of round. It's going to have a stamp. You might even see that it's got like little circles there. But it is going to have a 4-digit code on it. If it has a 3-digit code, don't run those tires. They are very old, okay? So if it has a date code of 1221, okay? The first 2 digits are the week that it was manufactured. So this was manufactured in the 12th week, and that number is the year. So the second pair of numbers is the year they were manufactured in. So the 12th week of 2021. So we're roughly, 12 or so weeks into this year, okay? So they're like 2 years old. Not necessarily a bad thing, but they're about 2 years old. But if I could get a tire that said 04 of 22, that's going to be a better tire. It's going to be fresher. If I can get one that says 04 of 23, that means it was made in the last week of January of this year, okay? A 3-digit date code, if I remember correctly, a 3-digit date code was used instead of a 0. So instead of saying 0403, it would just say 043. Okay. 3-digit date code, do not use that tire. Okay. I'm dead serious on that. Don't use that tire. Don't put it on your street car. Don't put it on your race car. Don't put it on your trailer because then you've got to change it on the side of the road. Okay. What about recaps? You should have been a shop teacher at a high school. I don't like kids that much, Bubba. I like teaching, but I don't like teaching people who don't want to be taught. So most tire players won't mount a tire dated 10 years old. Yes, tire places will not mess with a tire 10 years old. Some of them will not even do it if it's 5 years old, okay? The older a tire, it gets more dried out. It loses some of the natural oils that are in it. It starts dry rotting. It starts cracking. That weather checking, is it cracking. Okay. If it is weather checked, if you have a lot of cracks and stuff, just don't use that tire. Okay. If your racing program is on such a budget that you're trying to use 10, 12, 13 plus year old tires that are weather checked like crazy, sit out a few weeks until you can get some junkyard tires that are within the last 3 to 4 years. Okay. Please, for your safety, so you don't blow a tire, drive into somebody or the wall, just, okay. Now, recaps. Okay. So recaps are basically, we'll go over this just real quick. Retread or recaps. So basically what they do, so if you have your tire and you have, when it was molded, it had, say, this much tread on it, right? What a recap does is it comes through. Here, we'll make this. That is not a full circle, but bear with me because I wasn't planning on drawing the second half. Okay. What a recap does is it comes in and it shaves it down till it's smaller. Okay. Then it'll start at one spot and they just lay a new piece of rubber on top and then they kind of remold it. And sometimes they'll change the sidewalls and stuff like that. But it's typically just rubber placed on top. Now, some places will wind rubber. Some places will just use one big tread cap, okay? While they can be okay, they typically cannot handle heat and or as much stress as a first run tire. So I personally would not race on recaps, especially ones that are just like a single layer, right? So personal experience, right? We will get into shaving when we talk about tread, John. So let's get into the UTQG numbers, okay? So there's a few numbers on the side of these tires that you're going to want to pay attention to, okay? Treadwear. That is likely one of your best indicators for how good a tire is going to be on the racetrack, okay? Treadwear is a 3-digit number, typically. You can have a 200 or a 480 or a 040, typically known as 40 treadwear. This is a performance tire. This is not. That will make that look like that, okay? A Falcon Azenia, like your 615Ks, are 200 treadwear tire. Your Michelin, like, triple treads are like a 480, 500, 550, okay? Treadwear is actually tested, sorta, okay? The way treadwear is tested is there's a testing facility in Texas, and a tire manufacturer takes your tire, they put it on a vehicle, and they drive 7,200 miles. Every 800 miles, they can adjust alignment, they can mess with it, but same tire, 7,200 miles. And they compare that rate, how much that tire wears in that 7,200 miles, to a tire that they have as the benchmark. If it wears exactly the same, it has a 100 tread wear. It's a 1-to-1 ratio. If it lasts twice as long as that tire, it gets a 200 tread wear. If it lasts 4.8 times longer, you get 480 times. Now, here's why this number can be screwy. The manufacturer has to extrapolate that data, because if the tire only wears 1/32 over 7,200 miles, they have to assume that it'll lose 2/32 with 14,400 miles, right? They might do the math different. So maybe they have a tire that's actually a 700 tread wear, but they want to sell it in a different category, so they'll mark it as a 480, because we extrapolated the data and we got 480, right? Or you could have sanctioning bodies like SCCA who say you can run a tire, but it has to have the lowest treadwear rating is 200. You cannot go below 200. So the tire manufacturers, they want you to run their tire. So their 200 treadwear, well, they extrapolated the data, and if you and I did it, that 7,200, it might not go twice as long. It might only go 1.5 times as long. But instead of me making a tire that has a 150 rating and is not legal for you to run, if I stamp a 200 on the side, it's legal. Okay. But what tire manufacturers are not going to do is they are not going to have a tire that is a 150 treadwear and market as a 500. They might have a 200 that should be a 150. They might have a 500 they rate as a 450, but they're not going to make a huge jump. Okay. That's why I am a big fan of minimum treadwear for DOT tire classes, because there is not a performance tire made with a 300 or 400 treadwear rating. There's no sticky tires made in that category. Okay. The higher the number, the more miles it should go, the harder the rubber. Okay. So treadwear is a great indicator of how good the tire is going to be. All right. Oh. What's up, Jordan? Okay. Next, we have traction. Okay. Traction, if you look at a little bar on the side, by the way, so there's a bar on the side of the tire where these are going to be found, and it's going to say treadwear, and then have like the 200, and then it'll say traction and temp, and it'll have traction will be like a AA or an A. Temp will be I didn't write it down. A. It is also A, B, or C. Okay. So your treadwear, now these are also typically, these are cast right into the tire, and these have a little block where they were stamped in, but that's going to be on the side of your tire. Okay. Traction, A, AA, B, C. Traction is misleading because traction is tested wet. It is an indicator of wet performance. That's literally what it's for. Okay. Also, it is a very broad category. There's only 3 ratings. Okay. Almost all tires that you see nowadays are going to have A or AA ratings. Almost all of them. It's nothing that you have to pay attention to, but the way that they test it is that they have a skid, like a trailer that weighs a certain amount. They put the tires on it. They drag it along at 40 miles an hour. They apply the brakes on the trailer, trying to lock them up in the wet, and they feel the resistance of it. Like they measure the resistance, like the pull of it. And as long as it's above a certain number, it's A. So it's pretty misleading. Okay. It's nothing that really applies to us unless you're racing in the rain. Then you would want like A's or AA's, right? Treadwear isn't just compound. Depth comes into play in the rating as well. Yeah. So Scotty's right. And Scotty is saying treadwear isn't just compounds. Hold on, I got a Windows security thing popped up in front of my comments. Treadwear isn't just compound. Depth comes into the rating as well. You are correct on that, because treadwear is supposed to be how much it wears. So a performance tire is going to have shorter tread. A longer lasting, higher mile tire should have taller tread. That does come into play. So we will talk about that. We are going to talk about tread patterns and depths and all of that. So you are correct. Most lower, like 200. The thing with treadwear to remember, though, too, is that almost all of them are either performance or miles. Okay, because you might also hear manufacturers say a 50,000 mile tire or a 70,000 mile tire or a 30,000 mile tire. Okay, and that's the same idea. A 80,000 mile tire is going to have a high tread wear rating. A 10,000 mile tire is going to have a really low tread wear rating. Which, by the way, tread wear of 040 is like your Hoosier R6s, like the Hoosier Autocross slicks, which are ridiculously sticky, but they ain't going to last you but like 1,000 miles on the road, right? So something to keep in mind. So traction, don't worry about it. If it's A or double A, you're good because it's measured in the wet. Okay. Temperature also only has 3 categories. Okay. A, B, or C. Temperature is the ability of the tire to shed heat at speed. Okay. A tread or a temperature rating of A is 115 miles per hour. The heat generated at 115 miles an hour, that tire can effectively shed that weight or shed that heat. Okay. B and C were lower than that, but most tires are going to be like a treadwear or a temperature rating of A. Now, keep that in mind that if you do find one that's B or C, that it won't take heat as well. It's not designed to take heat as well. It won't shed it as much. So it's just going to continue to build heat up. Okay. So you want A, but most all of them are A already. The next thing that we want to talk about is speed rating. So somewhere on your tire should be somewhere, for example, an 87S. The 87 is the load index, which I didn't look up too much just because load index doesn't usually apply to us too much because passenger car tires are pretty much always the same basic-ish load rating. But that S is what I want to talk about, okay? The S is speed rated. S equals 112 miles an hour. What that means is that tire is rated for sustained speeds of 112 miles an hour. They go all the way to Z, which is like 100. So a Z rated tire is 150 plus. A W and a Y rated tires are like 168, 170 miles an hour for the new like exotic hypercars and stuff. Okay. You obviously want to make sure and try to find a tire, especially pavement, that has a speed rating at or above what you're planning on racing. If I'm going to hit speeds of 112 miles an hour, I don't want a tire that is got a 60 mile an hour speed rating. And you can find the chart if you type in tire speed chart. It has A through Z. Okay. Take a glance at it. Most tires, again, are in an adequate range. Most cars today are capable of 100, 110, 115 mile an hour. Most tires are built for that. And that is where the tire manufacturer says that it won't come apart from centripetal force. Okay. Not that it'll take the heat or anything like that, just that it won't blow itself apart at that speed. And I forget, I think it's something like the equivalent of like 15 miles essentially of that speed. But it is over time that it won't blow out due to that speed at the tire. So, yeah, as Jordan says, your trailer tires have speed ratings too, and they are typically lower than your passenger car tires. So now one thing to keep in mind, trailer tires, snow tires, off-road tires and that are not subject to UTQG ratings. So your trailer tire might not have traction, tread wear, temperature, speed, anything like that on it. It's not required to have that on there. So just one thing to keep in mind, if you do see a tire that's like a truck tire or a trailer tire or something that's not designed for that, it won't say what it is. So that's one thing to keep in mind, okay? Now, that is basically all the numbers on the sidewall. If there's any questions about any of those, go ahead and speak up. Let's get into tread pattern, tread depth, and like tire shaving, stuff like that, okay? DOT tires, again, I can't draw, okay? They're typically going to have tread blocks, right? These are measured in 30 seconds of an inch. Width is in metric, depth is in standard. America, right? The more tread depth, the longer the tire should last. But the more tread depth can mean disaster on a racetrack. So there's two things to take into account with tread as far as longevity and speed on a racetrack. Okay, one is how tall the tread block is. Okay, if you have a really tall tread block, okay, and most tread blocks when they get to the side are going to angle, they're going to come down a little bit onto the sidewall, right? But if you have a really tall block of tread, okay, when you go into a corner, the pavement's here, right? That tire is trying to go that direction. The ground is trying to hold it in this position. So that rubber is going to have some compliance. It is going to roll over. So your pavement's effectively going to come down here. And that whole tread block is going to end up pushing this way. And it's going to look like that. Okay. So if you have a really tall tread block, it sticks up really, really far, grab it halfway up and rip it off. So better example would be coming from the flat side, right? So if track's here, when that tire has its compliance, instead of being straight up, it's going to curl over like that. And the track, instead of biting on the top of that block, is now going to bite about halfway up, okay? The taller the tread, the more depth you have, the more compliance you're going to have, the easier it's going to be for that asphalt to grab and chunk your tire. And when it grabs it here, it might rip it there, but it also might pull it off from here where the rubber's thinner. This is how you take a brand new tire, go out, run some laps, come in, and the outer tread block's destroyed and you're all the way down to the cords. Yep, it was a brand new tire, but it had too much squirm, too much compliance. Now, the other part of this, as a performance standpoint, if it doesn't bite and it doesn't chunk, from a performance standpoint, the more compliance you have, the more wiggly, the more soft the tire is going to feel. Because as you turn in, all of that tread block has to move. Then the tire can move. If you go back to our air pressure one, we talked about that, how the tire like tucks under. Okay. So all of that tread block will cause that squirm and that wiggle. That's partly why performance tires have such shorter tread block. Okay. So if we have a high tread block, right, and we take this and we just cut it off, so we have a much shorter tread block. When the asphalt hits it, it's still going to deflect, but it doesn't have this long lever. It's going to deflect significantly less. So the way that you do this is typically called shaving. A lot of you guys have heard that term, shaving tires. Does not involve razor blades, okay? Shaving is the act of taking the tread block and cutting it down. How much is too much? Well, that depends on your tire. I typically found way back in the day when I had to run street tires, I have not ran street tires on a race car that were a high DOT rating since 2011. So keep that in mind. I still know about it, but the tire I used to run was a Sumitomo HTR 200. Okay, was a great tire. Lasted a long time. If people were on, we had a 300 treadwear rating, and I think that one was about a 380 tread. We had to have a 195/70 that was as wide and as short as we were allowed to go. So that was the tire to have, right? They started out, I want to say, around 9 30 seconds, and I would typically take them down to about 3 or 4 30 seconds. I own my own tire shaver, so I would take a little over half the tread off, and that made them last a really long time. That was the most life we got out of them. Some tires you can leave a little more tread block. Some tires you can take a little bit more. But shaving them, if we went out on a brand new right front tire with 8 degrees of camber, that's what we were allowed. I would chunk a brand new tire first race out. Shaving them, I could run 6 to 8 nights on the same exact tire, same exact brand, and all of that, just by shaving it. So less tread block, less squirm, doesn't bite. And the question was asked is, what about on dirt? Same thing. Yes and no, because the dirt surface changes. Okay. If your dirt track rubbers up and it's like driving on an asphalt track, yes, absolutely. You're going to grab the treadwear block, you're going to rip it off. If it is mud every time you go out there and it is everything you can do to just go forward when you hit the gas, you will probably won't even wear the nipples off of a tire, right? So the grippier the surface, the more it's going to bite. On dirt, you might want a big old tread block just so it's like running some old super swampers where you can actually bite into the dirt and pull it behind you and move forward, right? So on dirt, it's going to depend on the surface conditions, okay? So tread depth, you want some tread depth, but not too much, okay? The next thing to think about is the tread pattern, right? And this is where your asymmetrical tires come in and your directional tires, okay? Most directional tires are done for, by directional, I mean they have to rotate a certain way, right? You don't want to rotate them against the arrow, right? A lot of rotational tires do that is, for water, okay? That's why. It's so that it takes the water from the center, shoots it out the sides in that direction. That's what it's designed for. If you flip it the other way, it'll try to push it to the center. It'll hydroplane, okay? That's typically, that's what that's for. Now, an asymmetrical tire, what that means is, so we're pretending that we're looking straight onto the tire, okay? So this is the sides of the tire. This is the top, like we're looking down at it, right? What asymmetrical means, if these are our tread blocks, okay, a symmetrical tire is going to have the same pattern on both halves, okay? So this half is going to match that half. Pretty simple. An asymmetrical tire means one side is not like the other. So this half has blocks, long, spine down the middle, and long blocks over here. This is beneficial. Okay. Anytime I look at tires with a consideration of would I run those if I have to, I am always looking for long side tread coming from the sidewall. Okay. And the reason for that is we are applying the force, we're going to say from this direction. Okay. I might need to switch this out. So if I have a lot of tread like this that's short in that direction, I'm not going to be able to put a lot of rubber down here, and I'm going to expose a lot of that edge to grab and chunk. But if I come off the sidewall, again, we talked about the tire where the tread block will come down the sidewall a little bit, right? So if I have this and then it extends a good portion in, I don't actually have that edge to bite. Now, the rubber will still deflect. Like your tread block could actually bite here and it could actually deflect like that. So you would still rip that or rip that. So this isn't a surefire way to get rid of chunking. Like you might still have to shave the tire, okay? But having that long tread block here means that I have a flatter surface that is fighting against the force across more surface area. Now, almost all tires are going to have, they're not going to have squares that like that. They're actually going to have some sort of angle to them, typically. That is just to help push water out so the tires don't hydroplane, okay? It's a typical thing, right? Now, an asymmetrical tire like this is not going to have a rotation arrow. It is going to have an inside and an outside, okay? Now, the reason for that is because when you go into a corner and you turn and you transfer all the weight to that tire, the outside edge of that tire is going to take the brunt of that load because the tire is going to rock under it, right? And then the opposite tire is going to have the weight come off it a little bit, and it's, as it goes down, it's going to kind of scrub a little bit with less weight. So a shorter tread block on the inside is as much as it's going to grab basically as much as it can, but the outside edge is doing most of the load on the other tire. On a stock car like we run, the really cool part is that I only have to turn left. My left side tire, the outside edge, never sees the load like the right front does. The inside edge does. So if I'm running like a Falcon Xenia, the old 615s, they have an asymmetrical pattern like this. I always point the inside towards the inside of the track. So my left side will look exactly like my right side. And some people have thought I was really weird for that. Well, this is why. I now have the two biggest tread blocks on the two edges of the tires that do the most work, okay? So asymmetrical pattern, you want the bigger side towards most load. When you're looking at tires to see if they're worth trying, okay, they're typically not going to have such simple patterns. They might have something that's like a different black we'll try. Hey, there we go. Kind of better. They are likely going to have something that's more varied, right? Again, I'm not a good artist. That's why my tires look like this. So just take the general idea when you look at tires, okay? And almost all of them have a solid rib that runs down the middle. I've never really gotten a good explanation as to why, but a lot of tires have a solid rib down the middle, right? The other thing that they might have is if I'm looking at a tread block, if this is the base of the tire, so we've got our channels, which is like this channel right here, okay? Right? The tread block here might have some lines on it, and what it might be is that you might have a step, right, or a channel on that block, but it doesn't run all the way through that tread block. It stops about halfway. A tire like this, if I shave it down to that height, I'm going to get rid of those voids, so I can't rock that portion over. They can't chunk as easy, and I now have a larger tread block that's going to be put on the ground. The more rubber that you have, the longer the tread block, the better it should be, okay? Now, one thing to keep in mind, two kinds of directionals. You are correct, Jordan. There's directionals. Directionals can be inside, outside, or rotation. Most of the time, when people talk about directionals, they do mean rotation. But you are right. With the cost of a street tire and we're paying to shave tires, you're almost the same cost as a racing tire. Will shaved DOT tires last longer than a racing tire? Or that is a great question, Rick. So let's talk about that while we talk about compound, because compound matters. A racing tire does not have treadwear or temperature or any of that. They have compounds, harder and softer. The harder the tire, the higher the treadwear. The softer the tire, the lower the treadwear, right? For example, in my experience, you may or may not agree with this, that's okay. In my experience, the old Falcon Azenias, the 615Ks, were very, very comparable compound-wise to a Hoosier 790. The Hoosier 790 is kind of the go-to front-wheel drive tire, should be at least. A Falcon Azenia could last just as long or longer than a 790. It had more tread depth. It could handle heat well. It was designed for that. It's a 200 tread wear tire. The 790, back in the day, I personally could run 6 nights on a right front. On night 5 or 6, depending on how hard I ran, it would start to fall off at the end of the feature. I could qualify just as fast. Heat race would be just as fast. The first, say, 15 laps of the feature would be just as fast, but the final 5, 10, 15 wouldn't be. The Falcon, in my experience, would typically drop off a little more sooner, but it came back because the tire wasn't wore out. It was just overheated a little bit. Nowadays, we're getting 2 to 3 nights out of a 790. Because why not? Sell more of them. That's my opinion. So I have to, and Hoosier 790s are now $150 each, basically. And that's due to a price increase from Hoosier. Okay. By the way, guys and gals, your track's not getting rich selling you tires at the price they're selling them to you. They're going to make $1 to $5 a tire. Oh my God, they're going to sell so many tires at $5 a tire. Do they have a tire machine there? Do they pay somebody to work that tire machine? Cool. That's a multi-$1,000 piece of equipment, and they're paying somebody to run it every night. Pay a couple dollars a tire. Okay, so keep that in mind. It's a necessary evil for racetracks to make a little bit of profit on tires so they can afford to dismount tires for you. Okay, keep that in mind. So if I'm buying a DOT street tire that's a high tread wear tire and then shaving it, shaving can be anywhere from $10 to $25 depending on where you get it done. Well, if I'm spending $100 on a tire and I'm shaving it at $25 a tire, I'm still $25 or so cheaper. If you're allowed a little bit of camber, so you're not just trying to bake the tire clean off the thing, right? You can usually get 4, 6, 8 nights on a right front. Some guys can go a lot longer. Some guys can go a lot shorter. Also, you can buy them from other places. So when Hoosier goes, hey, we just decided not to make 790s like we said we would. We'll do it in 2 weeks. I know it's been 2 weeks, but we'll make them in 2 more weeks. I'm sorry, guys. This late model tour, they've got a 12 tire a car a night rule, and we've been making tires for them. So we'll make 790s at some point. When that happens, I can try different brands. I can try different sizes. I can try different treadwear. I can go to Walmart and buy them. So there are definitely some advantages to DOT tires. Now, one big disadvantage is a high treadwear tire, even if you shave it, is significantly slower than a race tire. So if you want to not have big motors and you want to keep the speeds down, a high DOT treadwear with small sizes like a 195 is going to slow your class down. It is going to limit horsepower, and the racing will probably be just as good or better. So I don't believe that every class should be on a Hoosier. I don't believe that every class, like all front-wheel drives, should be on a front-wheel drive tire like that. I truly believe the stock style classes should be on a high treadwear, narrow width DOT. I also fully think, and I'll stand on this hill, you have to allow some camber in the right front so that it does not eat the tires as hard, okay? It saves money. Also, allow shaving. It makes tires last longer. If I go out and I chunk a brand new right front in one race, I might as well be on Hoosiers, because a Hoosier can take that abuse better, because a Hoosier doesn't have tread blocks. A Hoosier 790, if you look at a Hoosier from the top, okay, I tell you what, you wait right here 1 second. I'll show you a Hoosier 790 from the top, because I happen to have one sitting on this car right here. But I got to spin these lug nuts off by hand. Just a second. I forgot I don't have to yell at you because I'm wearing a microphone. I forget that sometimes. By the way, you guys are about to see the bright yellow, which, I mean, it's been discolored in the middle because, well, I'm hard on the brakes. But this, ladies and gentlemen, this yellow color is courtesy of Jeremy Half a Sandwich down at, it's not his last name, at Media Blast Powder Coating. Okay. Don't worry, I'm going to be going to him for some more stuff. But a Hoosier 790 has lines. It's almost all tread with just some lines. Okay. These tires can take less camber. They can take that abuse better. So if you are not going to allow guys any camber, if you're going to have rules that they can't shave it and all that, just put them on a 790. They'll save money because they'll last longer. Okay. Give them some camber. Let them shave the tires. Because I'll tell you, if I had to run a class that said no shaving of tires, I'm going to shave that tire, and then I'm either going to do a real quick burnout, or I'm going to put that thing on my street car and drive it for 500 miles hard so that you can't tell it was shaved. To be honest. Oh, yeah, I just went down to the junkyard and bought that tire. So, yeah. Yeah, 400 treadwear. Rick, I 100% agree. I a 300 or a 400 treadwear rule with a, like, so Rick's compact class, there isn't V6s. You don't have to worry about a big, giant 3,000-pound car that must run 15 or 16-inch tires. If your class is primarily Civics, Neons, Cavaliers, Cobalts, Escorts, Focuses, stuff like that, and a 14-inch tire dominates a 195/70 with a 300 or 400 treadwear, it is going to last guys quite a while if they have camber and can shave it. They're a pretty popular size, right? Maybe like a 205/65, maybe. I have not looked to buy tires in a while. I'd have to do that research. But no 60 series, no 50 series, no 225s. A common size that a lot of brands have, and you'll have good racing. One guy might hit on the tire, and then the beauty of this, the beauty of street tires, don't allow alterations. If you look at the sidewall and you see that anything has been messed with that was not obviously done on track, boot them. I had a guy try to do that with me one time, cut the treadwear off, and he's like, well, that's for you to find out. And I said, okay, if you'd like to play that game, I was a tech guy for a year. Said, if you'd like to play that game, here's the deal. Those tires are illegal because they don't have a treadwear on them. Come back with different ones. He went, and I said, so what's the treadwear rating? It was a little bit too low. We let him slide one time. He didn't win, so it's fine. But don't play that game. Tires altered, right? But if it has a brand on the side and a model number, guys can see that. So if one guy finds a really good tire, everybody else can buy that same tire. You don't have to outlaw it. You don't have to do anything like that because everybody can buy the same tire. So, yeah. Jim, we just got done talking about shaving tires. So you'll have to go back when we're done and watch it a little bit, okay? So a Hoosier 790, as you can tell with that tread pattern, right? It should be a good tire. But for whatever reason, somebody at Continental would be my guess, not necessarily Hoosier, has decided to allow the 790 to fall into the same program as all the rest of their late model and street stock tires. And they are trying to turn them into a one-night tire so that you have to them again. When I first started running on 790s, we bought our first 790 in 2009. Up until about 2020, 2021, you could seriously run all season 20 races on 6, 7, maybe 8 790s and not see a decrease in time. I would have no issue running big money races on 3 or 4 night old tires. I won the World Series of Compacts on 4 night old tires, had fastest lap of the feature, won by almost 6 seconds. I mean, I was fast. I had a 4 night old race front, right front. That was before the tires were falling off. Now I'm buying tires every 2 to 3 nights. So I was really hopeful. I used to tell people all the time that yeah, I used to tell them how great the 790 was. Now the 790 and the 795 is a great example of compounds. If you have ever had the misfortune of racing on a 795 and racing on a 790, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. The 795 from Hoosier was originally designed to race Bristol Motor Speedway on pavement, the way it's intended, right? The 790 could not handle the abuse that Bristol did. So the 795 was born. It is a harder compound and it has more plies in it so that it can take more abuse. It will slow. This tire will last a long time because it doesn't have any grip. The 795 is about a half second slower than the 790. You bolt 790s on, you're going to go 2 to 5 tenths faster, just like that. Okay. Same exact size, same pressures, everything, 2 to 4 tenths, 2 to 5 tenths faster. Okay. That's when the 790s were scarce, the 795s somehow weren't. And I fielded so many questions. Hey, man, can we run the 795? Is it the same thing? No, right? Hoosier also on their race tires have, like, you might run a 790, a 795, an 800, a 700. I'm trying to think of some other like mini stock size tires, right? They're just different compounds, and the 790 might be the same compound as a 700. An 800 might be between the 790, 795. Like, you've got to compare their chart, which kind of shows you where it's supposed to be. Now, one way that you can try to decipher the compound is using a durometer. So a durometer, they typically look a little bit like this, and they'll have a probe that sticks out. They have a gauge here, okay? And the durometer measures how far that point will push into something rubber, okay, something flexible. The lower the number, the softer it is, okay, because it's pushing in farther. Like 100 means that it's solid. 0 means that it just pushed right all the way down through it, okay? So if you durometer tires, and durometers are cheap, you can get them for under $100. This works for street tires as well, okay? You can durometer any rubber tire, okay? So a softer tire, what actually happens, your asphalt looks like this. Everything always looks like this at some level, microscopically. The rubber, as it comes through, the softer the rubber is, it can conform down into these cracks, down into the little pits, and give you more surface area, and you're faster. A harder tire is going to not conform nearly as much, right? So that's why softer is typically better, generally better, okay? So if you durometer a tire and one of them durometers 65 and one of them durometers 50, the 50 theoretically is going to be faster, okay? There is other things, sidewall construction, tread pattern if you have like a DOT tire, but generally a 50 will be faster than a 65. This is why, okay, soaking is going to take you from a 65 to a 50. I will be as transparent with you guys as you may or may not believe me, but I will be dead nuts transparent as I can be. I personally have never soaked tires. I have never needed to. Back when Hoosiers would go 6 nights, I didn't want to do all the work. I was fast. I was winning. I didn't have to touch tires. Lately, I haven't raced enough to really get hit with the tire shortage. Last year, I only ran like 6 times total. I only finished 1 race, technically 2. So I didn't have to worry about it. I know people who soak. No, I won't tell you. They put a lot of work into it. I still beat them sometimes. So is it worth it? I don't know. Soaking is putting chemicals on your tire that react and soften the rubber. Okay. That's what soaking does. I'm not going to lie to you. I don't know what chemicals to use. I know that you can use, I think acetone is one ingredient. I know guys who do it. I've never done it. I don't know the recipe. You can buy pre-made soaks, track claw, stuff like that. Hoosier, of course, very much against it. They have to be because A, if you chemically alter their tire and they tell you it's okay to do, they can become liable if something happens. If you get the mix wrong and your tire's too soft, you'll chunk the snot out of it. You'll ruin your tire. You can wreck your car. You can go after Hoosier. Well, they told me it's okay to do. Well, no. Okay. They can't tell you that. Okay. How much damage are you doing? I honestly don't know. I have plans to soak tires for you guys for science. When it happens, it will be transparent. I am not going to run them anywhere it is not legal to do, or I'm going to run them for practice. Okay. I am going to very clearly mark any tire that gets soaked, and you guys will see it. Okay. And when we start doing that, I will likely be putting baby powder inside of all of my non-soaked tires so that I can prove I'm not soaking when I'm racing. Okay. And it is because I get asked about soak a lot, and I do not have any experience with it. I've not done it. I would tell you guys about. I've cheated before. I'll tell you when I do. Like especially if I did it back then and I didn't get caught. Right. I've never needed to soak tires, and to be honest with you guys, I'm pretty lazy when it comes to tires. I don't take care of them like I should. I don't want to put all the work into wrapping them and cleaning them and soaking them, and I don't want to actually do all that work. I'm going to for science, but I don't want to. Okay. So when that does happen, I will show you guys the videos. I will show you what tires, the marks that are going to be on them. So you will be able to tell at 25, 50 feet away if I'm soaking or not. Okay. I'm not going to tear down tires just to appease Joe Blow. But because it is going to be very public, say I go to Shady Bull and I'm running, and Rick Young, which by the way, for those of you guys in here, Rick Young, owner of Shady Bull Speedway. Okay. If I go to Shady Bull and I'm racing and Rick goes, hey man, I've been watching. I know you soak stuff. You mind pulling that tire off? Nope, I don't. Here you go. See, filled with baby powder. The reason that baby powder matters, if you're soaking a tire, you got to do one of 2 ways. Okay. This is what I do know. So if you have your rim and you have your tire, okay, if you coat the outside of your tire, it's going to soak into the outside of the tire. How long you can soak the outside makes how deep it goes, okay? But it's still only on the surface. Whereas if you put it on the inside of the tire, it can soften the whole tire, and it will typically go deeper into the tire, okay? That's what I've been told. Again, haven't done this myself. This is what I've been told. So a lot of guys are soaking the outside and the inside. The outside is usually easier to detect when it's illegal, right? Because you're going to see black marks go from the trailer to the track, typically. Okay. Yeah, John says, put baby powder in the soak tires too. We can try it, but I pretty much know what's going to happen, right? But the baby powder, if you put it on the inside of the tire, when you put soak inside the tire, that baby powder is going to disappear. So when you break down a tire, baby powder should be in there, right? It should look like baby powder. Now, if you break down the tire and you pull the valve stem, and it smells like lacquer thinner. Okay. So when I do soak, you guys will know. I'm not going to hide it, and I'm not going to run it where it's not legal. Okay. If a racetrack says, hey, you can run soak here, yeah, maybe I'll go race. But what I'm likely going to do is go to a track where I can run 10, 15, 20, 30 laps in a row to see how soak affects those tires. So that's my plan, right? Back in the day, we'd wipe tires down with brake fluid. I've heard brake fluid, Coke, a bunch of different ones. So, and Jordan says maybe tracks need to look into the 700. Well, the problem with the 700 is they don't make them in 14s. I think it was a 700. Hoosier has 3 or 4 viable options, but they're not the right size, or they're not the right regular size or rim size. By the way, Hoosiers are sized differently. So this tire right here is a 23 714. Okay, and the way that they size their tires, this is the diameter, that is the width, that is the rim size. Okay. Hoosier 790 is available in a 23, a 24, 714. They're available in a 23, 713. And then I believe they're available in a 26.5 and a 27, 715. Now, this goes back to sometimes numbers don't mean things, because a 24 714 is wider than a 23 714. And it's very easy to do if you'd like to see the comparison. Take a stack of 24s and a stack of 23s on the same rims and air them up to the same temperature, and the stack of 23s will be 4 to 5 inches taller. And it's not just the sidewalls. It's the tread, okay? And these, the 26.5s and the 27.15s, are way wider. They are a much bigger tire, right? However, these are like 82 inches circumference, and these, they should be like 71 to 72 inches. But Hoosier also has now basically given us, if you want a 23 714, you're going to get a 74-inch tire, supposedly. And if you want a 24, you're going to get a 77. And if you want anything else, too bad. Remember the olden days. I used to be able to get anywhere from a 70 to a 75 in a 23. And a 24 would typically be anywhere from a 74 to a 78, give or take a little bit. But yeah, you can't do that anymore. So trying to stagger when you have a lock differential is a lot of fun. I actually run a 24-23 combo on the front, and I only have 3.5 inches of stagger. I used to be able to get 4.5 inches of stagger on 24s alone. So another positive. Also, fun fact. You can tell a 23 or a 24 from a distance. The H in Hoosier on a 23 is the same size as the Hoosier. A 24, the H is twice as big as the letters. So if it has a short H, it's a 23. If it has a tall H, it's a 24. Also, Hoosier tires have a date code as well. Pretty sure I just seen it. But I think they date theirs differently. I thought I'd just seen it. They also have an inside and an outside, typically, or an arrow. They also kind of got rid of those too. Hoosier's been doing a lot of fun stuff for us. So, hey, you just answered my question. I messaged you, discard that message. Okay, cool. What's up, Kyle? Would running a grind over your tread help? 2020 season 1. What about an 850 versus a 790? I trust he's just a friend before I trust he's just a friend before I trust the chalk marks. Yeah, that's the other thing to remember. If you are getting Hoosier tires, the chalk marks are, it's kind of like the old whose line is it anyway? Points don't really matter. Everything's made up. I have toured the Hoosier plant. and this is part of what pisses me off about this. Hoosier can tell you if you have a tire that something happens, they can scan the barcode and they can tell you the exact shipment of supplies that they used to make that tire. But somehow we don't know how they used to last 6 to 7 nights. Now they only last 2 to 3. It's the same tire. It's the same rubber. Something's fucking changed, right? And it's getting harder and harder to believe it's not on purpose, right? However, the way they do the chalk marks is they take it out of the mold, hot, basically, and they put it in a machine which sets pieces against the sidewall or the bead, and they blow it up to like 5 psi. And there's somebody standing there, and they wrap a tape around it, and they read what it says, and they chalk it out. And then they bring on another tire. And they are not concerned with accuracy. They are concerned with speed because they have a whole batch of tires to do. So if they take that tape, if I have a tire and I'm running a tape on it and I run it exactly down the center, that's the most accurate reading. But if I take that same tire and I run a tape measure across it from one sidewall to the other, that is longer. So that's why the chalk marks vary so much. But you're going to find that a lot of these actually measure out to about 77 inches, and a lot of these actually measure out to 74 to 75 inches. And again, I used to be able to get these in the 70. So keep that in mind, right? Yeah, and I am glad you were here too, Kyle. Kyle rolled his stuff pretty good. Which I gotta watch the video that you posted where you walked around the car, man. I have not had time to do that yet. So yeah. And the 850 versus a 790. Okay. So I can tell you that I would rather put 4 795s on my car and compete against guys with 790s than I would run an 850. So Hoosier has this line, and this is their compound line, right? So over here is their stickiest stuff. So like the late model slicks would be somewhere in this region, right? The 790 should be somewhere about here. 795 is probably about here. The 700, the 800 are within this range. The 850, well, the camera only goes to here. The 850 is like way over here. It is the hardest, longest lasting tire. They're great for longevity. You can run the same right front for 12 weeks in a row and not go any slower. But that's because you could go faster probably on a 195 with a 400 treadwear rating. The 850 is a very hard tire. I would not recommend the 850 unless you have to run the 850, and everyone else is on the 850 as well. VCTS runs the 795 on all four corners. I hate the 795, but if I'm on a 795 and literally everyone else is on a 795, I don't mind because everybody's on the same crap tire. You don't have a real advantage that way. Okay. But the 850 is just not good. It is a very hard tire. It squeals harder. Like when you go into a corner and you turn, it just like it does that way more than like regular DOT tires do. So, all right, what haven't we covered? Compound we covered a little bit. Also, if you're buying a DOT tire and you see they're under R compound, which is going to be your Dureza Star specs, your Falcons typically fit under that category, your Toyo R888s. All of those are what they kind of call R compounds, and it's slang for like race compound. Because those tires could have different compounds as well. They just try not to because you want to keep it even. Compound is, unless somebody tells you like Hoosier with their chart that says we're running this compounds, it's hard to get kind of an exact number. The durometer is usually your best bet for that. So, but we've covered treadwear, sizing, traction, temperature, speed, tread pattern, tread depth, shaving, Oh, another trick if you're running Hoosiers. You can make them smaller or you can make them bigger. It's harder to make them smaller, but it's easier to make them bigger. So if you have your tire, because Hoosiers are what they call bias ply. So they actually have like belts, typically polyester, that run that way in a tire. Whereas a steel belted radial has literally steel that like runs this way. So like there's steel to stop it from growing and whatnot. Okay. But those bias ply, because they're made of like polyester and stuff, they can move around a little bit. So if you take a tire and you pump it up to a good pressure, something like, I don't know, 40, 50 psi, right? And then you huck it out in the sun where it gets nice and warm and that black absorbs all of that. That tire will grow. The circumference will get bigger. And yeah, it'll keep doing that. So it'll stop a little bit, but you can grow a tire a little bit. You can't grow it like inch, 2 inch or anything like that, but another ½ inch or so is capable. So if you do need a tire that's just a little bit bigger, not a steel belted radial, but the bias plies like your Hoosiers or American racers, you can actually grow them. So cover proper use of a durometer. Nitrogen. Oh, good one. Nitrogen or air. Oh, we can talk about that because air pressure. Okay. Also, proper use of a durometer. So you want to do a couple things. We'll cover that one really quick. So the hotter a tire is, the softer it's going to be. So when you durometer tires, measure them cold and warm, just to get the difference in them. The warm is what you really care about, especially if your track has a no higher than number. But you want to make sure, so like this tire, for example, right? You'll see hopefully you can see, I got like the boogers on it, like the just rubber pieces. You want to make sure that you have a clean surface. You could take a wire brush, right? Sander, anything like that. Just have a clean surface. And you want to make sure that you are flat. You don't want to be one way or the other. Push it flat, read what the number does. And I typically will go flat. I'll rock it a little bit, read the number, do it again, rock a little bit, do it again. Make sure that they're all fairly close, within 1 or 2. And another good way to measure tire wear and heat is durometer across. Because if you have a tire that you've been heat cycling the outside and you wear the outside a lot more, that can actually harden because the high heat and cool down can create a shell on the outside, and it will durometer harder than the inside. So if your tire durometer's different, keep that in mind that it might be wearing differently. So durometers are a really easy tool to use. We have one sitting around, but I think it's in our spare stuff, so I don't have it here. But when we get a little closer to racing, some of you are already racing, we'll actually make a quick video on how to use a durometer. So nitrogen, and yeah, Scott says the 850s are junk. They dropped a second off this time going to the 790s. The 850s are crap. Nitrogen versus air compressor air. Okay. First off, air compressor air, if you dry it properly, can be just as good as nitrogen. Most people, like this guy, don't drain their air compressor. They don't have an adequate dryer, so the air that goes into the tires has a lot of moisture in it. And that matters because because the molecules are so far apart, when it heats up, it insulates really well. Your tire is not going to grow much because the molecules don't really excite, they don't really grow. Water molecules, on the other hand, when they get hot, they expand. Okay. So if you have a lot of moisture in your tires, you are going to grow a lot when that tire gets hot. Okay. This is why I also, when we talked about this with tire pressure in our first show, but I care about the hot tire pressure. I know generally what I run for a cold temperature, and then I will set them roughly. I'll set the tires there. I will go out and practice, and I will see what my pressures are after that when they're hot, and I will adjust it quickly. That's why if you guys are ever at a race with me, if you want to come talk, you want to hang out, you want to ask questions, you want me to answer some questions about your car setup, awesome. When I come off the track, 5 to 10 minutes, if you come up to me, I am probably going to be like, hey, give me a few minutes and then I can do that, right? And it's because I'm going to walk around, I'm going to check my pressures. I'm either going to make some adjustments myself, or I might talk to my crew if I have one about making adjustments, and I'm going to adjust my tire pressures in that. That way, I know if I adjust my hot pressure 3 to 5 psi, when it cools down, I don't care what that number is. When it heats back up, I should be back in that same range, right? So the first 5 minutes or so when I come off track, that's when I adjust the car because I'm checking hot pressures and I try to make any adjustments before I lose them out of my head. I don't want to have to go and, get into the mindset of your issue, which I'm happy to do that, but I don't want to do that and not have mine fixed so that when I come back to my car, I'm like, oh man, what was it doing? Like, was it when I'd go into the corner? Was it, when did I hit the, I'd rather just get that out of the way so then I can, help you fully. Nitrogen is as dry as it can be. Doesn't have any moisture in it. So when you fill a tire with nitrogen, it theoretically should not grow as much when it gets warm, right? That's its main caveat. It should be more consistent over a run. Because if your tire performs optimally at 25 psi, but your tire is going to grow 10 psi, you are either going to start out at 15 and hope to grow to 25, or you're going to start out at say 20 and you're going to grow to 30 and you're only going to be optimal for a short period, right? Nitrogen, the theory is that you could start at 25 and it stays at 25 and it's always optimal. It still grows, maybe not as much, but it does still grow. And the reason being, you cannot get all of the air out of your tire. If you run nitrogen, what a lot of people do, what I've done, we ran nitrogen. I'll probably run nitrogen this year if we get our tank set up. What you typically do, you've got to bead the tire with air because most of these tires, you've got to hit them with air, a puff of air, a bead blaster, something to that effect. You've put air in the tire. So you're going to pull the valve stem and you're going to possibly push all the air out by pushing on the tire, right? You're then going to reinflate with nitrogen. Then you're going to let all the nitrogen out. Then you're going to reinflate. And you might do that a couple times. But if I have this much air and, under pressure and I let it out, so I only have that much air left in, and then the next time I fill it up and I have that much nitrogen and that much air, when I let it out, I might only lose that much air. I cannot tell you how many times you would have to flush out with nitrogen until you get pure air. Like until you get pure nitrogen, until you get all of the air out. But it's probably a lot because it's just going to dilute. It's going to just mix in amongst the nitrogen and the air. I mean, the air you breathe is like 71% nitrogen, right? So it's just going to keep diluting. You're always going to have a little bit of air in there. The drier the air going in, the less it's going to grow. So if you have dry air and then you replace what you can with nitrogen, your tire won't hardly grow at all. So nitrogen is better for that aspect, but you need a tank, regulator, hoses. That's all nitrogen. Now, one benefit of nitrogen that is not tire related. If I have an air tank, right? An air pig, whatever you want to call it, and I'm filling it from my air compressor. I got my air compressor here turned up a little bit. It's at 140, 150 psi. Okay. So I will have my air tank and it will have 150 psi in it, right? Say I wanted to run like an impact or something, right? I've got 150 psi and it's going to disappear quickly, right? Whereas a nitrogen tank, that bad boy's probably got about that many psi in it. It's about 2,000. And I can set my regulator on top to 150 psi, and I can run an impact gun for a long time. A long time. And the beauty of that is if I turn that up to like, I don't know, 200, that impact runs even better. That's what NASCAR does. That's why a lot of their guns evolved. They use nitrogen and they can be upwards of 300 PSI or so that they wing them, right? So you can use nitrogen to run air tools as well. So something to keep in mind. Also, if you don't have a air compressor at the track, you are at the mercy of the air tank that you have and the volume of air that's inside of it. Whereas if you have nitrogen, the volume of air inside of it is significantly larger just because of the pressure. So, yeah. Thoughts on running a vacuum pump on the tires? If you really want to get into the weeds, you can vacuum down the tire, then fill them with nitrogen. Maybe teaching is your next career. I don't like kids that much, Jeannie. Just hit it with Aether to set the bead. It'll vacuum itself. Yeah, you can do that. Vacuuming the tires. Again, if I have my tire on the rim, right, that's a terrible rim. But if I have this space, I can vacuum that tire down, but I cannot evacuate all the air because I can't suck that tire down until it fits that space, right? Because that tire is probably going to suck down to something that looks kind of like that. This all has air in it. Does it help you take, instead of having that much air that you get down to that, and then you get down to that, and then you get down to that? Yeah, that absolutely helps because you're going to start somewhere around here, right? Because if you have this much and then you vacuum it down and refill nitrogen and vacuum down, it will help you get there faster, but there'll always be air in it. The only way that you can have pure nitrogen in your tires is to have a pure nitrogen tent that just flushes all of the air out, and you mount your tire in that environment, and then you fill the tire with nitrogen. Oh, and if you run Hoosiers, they breathe. If you don't believe me, spray some Dawn on the outside of them, and you'll watch them weep a little bit. It's just the way they're made. So you are going to lose some air that way. So now here's the other thing I'm going to say, guys and gals. Some of you, and this might sound mean, some of you are going to notice a difference if your right front grows 5 psi more or less. And some of you could adjust the right front 25 psi up or down and wouldn't tell a difference, and your lap times wouldn't change. If your program is to the point where everything is on point, nitrogen could be the answer to take you to that next level. If you are running unknown brand junkyard tires with unknown tread depth, with an unknown history, and you are doing it because they're $10 a piece, nitrogen's probably not the answer because the tire you just put on could gain you 2 to 3 or 4 tenths, could change your cross weight a bunch because of size and all that, right? So don't overthink it. Nitrogen is awesome if you're at that level, okay? I'm not going to tell you not to do it. I don't care what level you're at. I can tell you that I haven't ran nitrogen in a long time, but I'm thinking about doing it this year. But the level of the build quality of the car that I'm building, I'm hoping that I need to be able to not grow the tire like that. So the other reason too why I set my tire pressures hot is so that when I start to race, I would rather lose speed the first 5 laps than the last 5 laps, because if I don't drop off on lap time and you do, I'm going to get around you. If I'm really fast the first 5 laps and say I jump out front, but then I slow way down after that, you're going to pass me. So I try, when I set my cars up, both with tire pressure, setup, everything, I try to make sure that when everything comes to temp, when them tires come to temp, that the car stays the same through the rest of the race. That's my goal. If you race your car and you find that it grows 10 psi, 12 psi, and you set it hot, and you go out there and the car is really bad to start, but then it gets really good, and then it goes away. Check your air pressures. If they're higher again, you've got too much moisture, it's growing, it's going away from you. If you go out there and it's really good and then it goes away after 2 or 3 laps of speed and never comes back, you're likely where you need to be hot, and then you grow. So tire pressures, that's one thing to keep in mind with the growth, is that's why I have checked mine hot so that I know where it's at the end of the night. So a few drops of ester oil will help seal the pores in Hoosiers. Okay. And Joe's saying they can get down to 12% humidity. Anything more is overkill. See? And pure nitrogen has no humidity. So that's, there's still air in it. Now, Joe's also working with some like Formula Indy type of stuff. Like they're doing some real top-notch stuff. Those guys notice when tires grow. So he does race front-wheel drive, but he also messes with that kind of stuff. Also have to take into account how often changing tires occurs to make nitrogen effective. Yeah. Part of the other thing with that too is if you have nitrogen, you have to have nitrogen at the track. Now you can have a nitrogen bottle, like a smaller one that will have a higher PSI in it that you can use to fill tires, but you have to have nitrogen at the tank. So you either have to lug the big tank or you have to have a smaller tank set up, because if I go to the racetrack and I fill my air pig with air out of my air compressor, but I fill the tires with nitrogen, if I go to the track and I add 5 PSI, I just pumped a bunch of air into my tire. So you have to have nitrogen at the track as well. So that is one thing to keep in mind. If you are like me, where you try to make things simple, it just adds a whole bunch of work. So is the benefit worth the work? That's up to you. And Scotty says, being serious, ether to set a bead is a bad plan. Sometimes it's the necessary evil, but yes, it is a bad plan. It is an explosion. So yeah, I don't recommend it if you don't know what you're doing. I'm not going to show anyone how to do that method. So, and as Joe says, he doesn't bother on his 4-cylinder. So draining your air compressor is good for your tires and your compressor tank. It is. Do not take 6 gallons of water out of your 60-gallon tank. That was me. So, yeah. Throwing a couple of jerky desiccant packs in each tire. I wonder. So if you guys have ever seen the balance beads, they're effectively just airsoft BBs. They'll find the imbalance spot in your tire and they'll kind of balance it out. I'm curious if you could do that with desiccant beads. Because desiccant beads trap the moisture. So even though the moisture is still technically in the tire, I'd be curious how much water it would pull. Honestly, I don't know if it would change, because the other part of that is the beads would heat up and release the water, or just grow. I don't know if I could achieve the level of accuracy necessary to do that test. I kind of really want to, and I might go down a rabbit hole where I try to figure out if that's a thing or not. But yeah. Yeah. And Brady, thanks for supporting on YouTube. Thank you all for being here on YouTube. So, exactly. I've done it too many times, but I'm not telling anyone else to try. There are some stuff that, yeah, there's some stuff that people should do and they shouldn't do. Yeah. And Michael says, I've done it with regular beads and it just it sucked. It shook like hell. Yeah, balance beads are one of those that you have to add a certain amount. If you add too much, it'll cause an off balance. I would never do it on the race car, but I've thought about doing it on street vehicles. So if you were still watching, hit the like button. We've been doing this for 1 hour and 45 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and call this one a night on the tire discussion. Next week will be probably our final for a moment. We're going to talk about Ackerman and bump steer, and we'll talk kind of briefly about roll centers a little bit. those are three things that are kind of important to know about, but you probably won't be able to change. But we'll cover those next week with the whiteboard again. Yeah, Thursday we will have a show. I'm working, but I'll be home in time, so we can do a show on Thursday. We're gonna try to get Jordan Carpenter on if everything works out. We've been trying for a little while, but we'll have a guest. We'll do a show Thursday. So, yeah, if you haven't already, hit the like button. Think about becoming a subscriber. I am going to go live in the subscriber group for after this. We'll try to make it a kind of quick one. But yeah, if you got a tech subject or just something you want to talk about, head over to the subscriber group. I'll be live in 5 minutes or less. So thank you all for being here. As always, it is immensely appreciated. I love you guys. Have a good night. We'll see you soon.